Hi, everybody. I'm Roberto Alvarez at the GFCC. The GFCC is a global multi-stakeholder organization. We have a footprint in 30 countries today. And this is the third now boot rebreach conversation that we have. We are getting started now, and I really wanted to explain to you a bit about our session and the whole initiative before we get started. So we're having a series of 8 dialogues reflecting on the current crisis, but also thinking about the future and future developments that we will have and that we can potentially work on in building a new reality. So I wanted to do 3 things before we started. Explain what is that, this whole series, then introduce you to the conversation that we're having today, and I'll explain a bit about the session. As I said to you, this is the third session that we have now, Bridge and Reboot. So what is that about? We know at this moment we have organizations, cities, and nations responding to the crisis. But what could we do to maybe reimagine, recreate the economy and society to reboot that in the future? And what can we do, or we should do, to bridge, to connect the now with the future? This is why we say this is now, bridge, and reboot. This conversation, it's about turning knowledge into impact. I think there are different possibilities for us to address that. It's our third conversation. We're joined by speakers from across the globe. In a minute, I will introduce themselves. But the spirit of this is learning about things that are being done on the ground, capturing experiences and ideas about our future. So my second point, and I'll briefly introduce you to our speakers in a minute, it's ready to think on what do you say when you comment about turning knowledge into impact. I think there are 3 aspects that we could approach when we do that. The first is how we could better mobilize knowledge coming from science and research to inform policy. The second one is how can we in some way use that knowledge to improve the public debate in general. And third, how can we create the products and the services that are needed to respond to the crisis, but also as we look toward the future, how we can create innovative economies and innovative solutions. We will be joined today by GFCC President Deborah Wynne-Smith, that should be with us in a minute. We have our colleague and dear friend Colin Grant from London. Colin is the Vice Principal International for Queen Mary University London. He was the founding Vice Principal International for different universities in the UK. He is the leader of the Education Board at the British Council and leads a series of global initiatives. Colin, thanks for joining. We have joining us from Australia, Paul Evans. Paul played leadership roles in telecommunications companies. He was a key leader at Icon, the company that manages the internet domain infrastructure, setting up operations in the United States and other parts of the globe. He's a co-founder of Zenova, that's an open innovation company, and he's now the founder of he's the chief business officer for Suzanne, but also has been involved as a co-founder of other tech ventures. Paul, thanks for joining us. From Greece, we have Petros Doukas. Petros has a fantastic career in finance, and he has founded Capital Partners in Greece. Used to be one of the key leaders for Citibank in Greece and in Europe. And now he's the mayor of Sparta. And Petros, thank you so much for joining. We will be delighted to hear your perspective. From Uruguay, we have Victoria Alonso Perez. Victoria is an engineer and entrepreneur. She has been working in technology and space ventures we're doing a lot of things on space, and he's a co-founder of ChipSafer, a company that is working on animal health based in Singapore. Thank you so much for joining us, Victoria. And finally, from Malaysia, we have Professor Zakri Abdul Hamid. Professor Zakri has played over the years a series of roles advising international organizations and also the government of Malaysia, working in the research and university space and in the policy space across the globe. And he is one of the Southeast Asia nature preservation heroes. Thanks for that, Professor Zakri. It's great to have you here. So the logistics for this conversation is I will make a few initial comments, and I think that Deborah will shortly join us. I think we have here, yes, I'm not sure if I can see Deborah. Yes, so Deborah is joining us. Wonderful, Deborah. Your image will be with us shortly. So Deborah will make initial remarks on our conversation. Then we will turn to each one of our speakers for an initial round of comments. And then we really want to have a conversation. So please feel free to raise questions to your fellow panelists here. That's part of the game, part of our conversation. Before we get started, I think there are two things or three things that I want to comment with you. First is we're talking about turning knowledge into impact, and we're mostly doing that through the lenses of research and university, or thinking how knowledge originated from research and university could be better applied in the context that I comment to you. Policy, the public debate, innovation, the creation of concrete products and solutions to others' needs of people and communities around the globe. The second thing is, what are the domains that we're thinking about that? So I think at different spaces, as we comment, we can think about that at the international level, advising and supporting international organizations. We can think that at the national level, driving policy and driving the advancement of innovation ecosystems. We can think about at the city level and about the response and how advise new solutions could help mayors like Petrus, for instance, to address the current crisis, but also to build innovative city economies going forward. We can think about that at the corporate level, but also at the, I would say, at the startup, new venture tech domain, and Victoria will share her perspectives with us. So Deborah, I'm not sure if you can hear us. Can you, Deborah? Maybe we have a connectivity issue here. I know that Deborah is online. I'm not sure if she can hear us, but she will join us along the way. And maybe to get started, Colin, we could have your perspective. The GFCC has a group that's the University Research Leadership Forum. Colin Grant is one of the leaders in that space. And one of the topics that we're addressing there, especially when we think about the future of universities or the University 4.0, is exactly how universities can better translate what they generate into impact in society. You've been doing work on that. You've been thinking about that. Colin, we would love to hear you. And I would ask everybody to put their microphones on mute when others are speaking. I think that would make our conversation more fluid. Colin, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much indeed, my old friend Roberto Alvarez. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all. This has become now the standard form of introduction to ensure that all points of the globe are covered. So I am, as Roberto kindly said, Vice President, Queen Mary University of London, which is part of the Russell Group of research-intensive universities in the UK. And also we have a Global Policy Institute at the university whose job it is to take our science base and translated into real social impact. And the science base, I understand, is something very broad, from medicine all the way through to law and engineering. So good afternoon, good morning also to Deborah. I'm really honored to have been invited to join this excellent group of panelists and delighted to engage once more with friends and leaders at GFCC. I've been enjoying this since 2016. I'd like to share a few thoughts about the landscape as I see it before engaging in what is, I'm sure, going to be an exciting dialogue with others. And I look forward to hearing your insights. Please take my remarks in the spirit of a stimulus paper, a short stimulus paper. So in 1848, Karl Marx wrote of a spectre haunting Europe. That spectre has gone, but another haunts us now, and it is the spectre of denial or denialism. Haunted by this spectre, science, evidence, and truth have taken a battering and remain vulnerable in these heavy times, these times of lead. Quackery and snake oil are back on sale in the global digital bazaar. For the well-endowed parts of the economy, for the prosperous parts of the economy, digital transition has arguably been more or less swift. But for the excluded, the vulnerable, or marginal, the digital represents just one more divide. The WHO at times seems like a political football, and the grander coordinated effort equal to the secular challenge is still not on the horizon. Longer term, I see a standoff between what I call the denialists and the rebooters. The denialist world is the world of a return to business as usual. Please define that. Zero-sum trade, protectionism, post-democracy, chaos, and disinterest in the global south. For the rebooters, there is, it seems to me, a palpable thirst for a new social, economic, and global compact. Nothing less than that. A new social, economic, and global compact in which we work in concert across sectors against the economic insanity of exclusion, to re-envision global institutions and build a new resilience for all. The digital is here to stay, as Marshall McLuhan put it, as an extension of man, although not for all men and women. And the clash of systems will also be with us, I fear, for years to come. Pre-COVID-19, the world entrenched monologue of short-sighted economics, the monologues of elites addressing elites, an easy acceptance, an all too easy acceptance that exclusion was somehow part of an acceptable bargain. The opportunity that presents itself now is to embrace asymmetry and disruption, create the incentives for a grand rebalancing in the social, economic, and ecological spheres between North and South, young and old. If we achieve this, the political might just, huffing and puffing, follow in its wake. My question and appeal in these introductory remarks is therefore, how do we move swiftly to forge new and purposeful coalitions across cities, enterprise, civil society that are anchored in education and opportunity? For make no mistake, universities worldwide are incubators of innovation, generators of future leaders, and guardians of out-of-the-box thinking. Thank you.
Thank you, Colin. And for those in attendance here, please use the Q&A feature here. We can start to pull questions. And thanks for your remarks, Colin. Thanks for highlighting the importance of universities at this critical moment in time. Professor Zachary, I would like to turn to you. You have your video off, but you have been, you have research background, you have led universities, you have advised international organizations from the UN to the Islamic Development Bank, where now you have a role. So what's your take on how we could better engage universities in the public debate, positively influence our vote today? The floor over to you, Professor Zachary.
Thank you, Roberto. Good morning, Good afternoon and good evening to Deborah, Roberto, fellow panelists, ladies and gentlemen. I'll respond to your question later, Roberto, but for my first 3 minutes, let me focus on science, advice, and policymaking. According to my good friend Sir Peter Gladwin, President-elect of the International Council of Science, COVID-19 is arguably the biggest challenge for science-based policy making the world has faced since World War II. It has brought the value of a global network dedicated on science advice into much sharper focus. Ladies and gentlemen, the pandemic has highlighted the complex interface between scientific evidence, experts, public institutions, the public, policymakers, diplomats, and politicians. Now, it has exposed very different responses in different jurisdictions and demonstrate the challenge of decision making when the evidence is incomplete but decisions are urgent. Policymakers face competing advice from formal advisory mechanism, academics, the media, and others. In all of this, the need for transdisciplinarity is obvious. Epidemiologists and virologists do not have all the answers. Social and other sciences are also needed. Ladies and gentlemen, for years, scientists and public health experts have warned about the inevitability of a pandemic. They have long suggested the high probability of zoonotic pandemic. Yet, here we are. Why do those advice not get traction in policy decisions? Why do governments give lower priority to investing in long-term risk reduction when the probability and impact assessment indicate that they should? Is this a failure of global leadership and persuasion? Think about it. Ladies and gentlemen, to conclude, if governments take preemptive steps to avoid pandemics, it would cost them billions of dollars. That's a lot of money. But if they don't, even if pandemic occur once in a century, like what we are having now, it would cost them trillions of dollars, as we are witnessing today, not to mention the loss of lives and jobs. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Zachary. And thanks for highlighting those two critical aspects that first, this is a very complex situation, and we can only address properly the situation if we connect different domains of knowledge. So it's a multidisciplinarity, as you said, it's a critical aspect to deal with complex realities. And the second thing, what I believe, and this is really connects to our previous conversation that we had a week ago, this is not a black swan. We had different signs about this crisis in the past, and we could have avoided impacts. And as you said, the economic impacts are massive. So maybe if we had heard better the signs that we had in the past, we could have avoided this. Petrus, Greece has been a success in terms of dealing with the crisis, right? So maybe if you could share with us your perspective on what's going on, but also how you, as a mayor, who are at the front line of dealing with citizens in your city, is seeing this, and how you are mobilizing, or you could better mobilize knowledge and innovative solutions to deal with this whole situation. Thanks for joining us.
Yes. First of all, congratulations to Deborah and yourself for the initiative. It's really great to have such distinguished people sharing their insights and knowledges. Now, I'm the mayor of this famous city of Sparta, and so far in the past 3 months, we had 0 corona incidences. And I think it's not that because we're smarter or we're doing things better than others. What has helped is that it's agricultural land. People are more out in the open air. We did, of course, everything that the government asked us to do: social distances, cleaning up, washing up, wearing masks and all the stuff, staying at home. We did all that, but it helped that we were not in crowded, swamped areas. So luck played a role. You know, one guy with a virus could managed to come in and we would have problem, not as much as other cities like Bergamo, which is much more crowded with older towns, older buildings that can host these kind of viruses more easily than the open space that Sparta gave. Now, there are a number of issues that are beyond the pandemic. I think the pandemic will come under control sooner or later, and science will come up with some cocktail medicines and will come up with some antivirus solutions. I think we're getting to have some major problems being the environment. Very, very important is the China-US conflict and China and Australia conflict. These kind of conflicts are going to take us back many, many years without solution. No, we're getting into uncharted territory without any visible solution. There's no visible solution in this conflict, and whether China is to blame for the virus or not, it won't lead us anywhere. You know, one of the things my boss has taught me at Citibank is when you get into something, know how you can get out of something. So when we start this idea of accusing who's responsible or more responsible or who did this or that, you have to know where could that lead us. Maybe say, I'm going to imprison somebody. Okay, that's some, but these things cannot happen. So where are we headed? And the third issue, we said one is environment, two is US, China, and all their allies kind of conflict. And the third is the heavy income inequalities. Because as we discussed before, the digital age will get some people who are in the digital age and can get advantage of it, and some people will stay behind. And in an open market, the capacity to have bigger income differences than in the past are more and more visible. For example, if I run against you, the Usain Bolt for 100 meters, he will do 100 meters and I will do 20 meters. So our distance is going to be 80. If we run 400 meters with him, our distance is going to be 300, and so on and so forth. So the wider the space for the economy, the wider the income inequality is going to be. Getting very briefly back to our subject is one, I think we need to develop some sort of university lecture library, and the Deborah can play a very leading role. For example, let's get together the best lectures of the best professors and develop a library for anybody from Shanghai to Sparta to New York to Chile can go out and look at the best lectures of the best brains we have, so people can get almost free access to the best brains we have, more than they do just from the internet. Number two, I think local governments and city and municipality governments can play a much bigger role as they played in the pandemic. In the pandemic, the central government stood to the local government and said, you mayors, you know everybody, do whatever you can to clean up the cities, make sure the citizens obey by the laws and the antivirus decrees. So these two things, and of course the third is the distance marketing and distance selling and distance learning and distance business, are going to be part of our everyday life much faster than they were going to be anyhow. But now it showed that kids can learn from home. Kids can attend classrooms from home. You can conduct business as we're conducting right now via Zoom conference. So this is going to be part of the daily life. People being able to use electronics and artificial intelligence much faster than they were going to do in the past. So I would say a library of, first of all, I don't think these problems are going to be solved even if we suggest interesting things. We're in for a tough time for a few years to come. So I would say, let's get a lot of top lecturers, their lectures on their internet, so people from all over the world can have access to the best brains. Let's use this kind of Zoom conference to put scientists more close to the wider public in an unprecedented level. Before, you had to have a lecture and fill in 200-300 seats when somebody was lecturing. Now you can do what we're doing now, and a greater mass of people can actually benefit from whatever wisdom we're all imparting. And the third is to get the cities to actually try to implement these kind of policies. Cities should be part and parcel of tomorrow's development. For example, very quickly, and I'll give you the floor, in Sparta, we think that culture is a heavy industry. It's not just something you do on a weekend because it's nice to be involved in culture. Culture is heavy industry for every country, and we, of course, in Sparta, has something to contribute there. Agriculture, more than, for example, in Sparta, I don't expect Sparta to become a Silicon Valley in our region. No, we will invest more in new agricultural techniques and new agricultural type of firms, because that's where we have a comparative advantage, and we need to look where our comparative advantage is. We'll invest in our culture-heavy industry, and so on and so forth. And we will do these things in a limited fashion, but in a very focused fashion, and we think we're going to have a good response and good results. So the floor back to you, Roberto.
Thank you, Petros. And it's great to know that you have a very positive situation there in Sparta in comparison, I think, to other countries in Europe and to other places around the globe. So wonderful to know that. And you really highlighted some very critical aspects that we talked in some of the previous sessions, and that connect even with the backgrounds of some of our speakers, like the digital divide. How can we really be sure that we have in place the digital infrastructures that are needed today, not just for us to conduct business, but also to close the gap in society as we more and more go digital. So thanks for highlighting that. And maybe, Paul, this is something that we could explore along the conversation, because I'm sure that you have ideas about that and digital infrastructures. But the one idea that I want to leave here in the clipboard for us to reflect back, maybe Colin, when we have another round, you could comment on that, is how we could make progress toward what Petros just mentioned, this global library, or we could say this global knowledge resource or body of knowledge that could be useful at different levels, from the city level to the national level, not just to address the pandemic, but in a broader sense to help countries and cities to address complex problems. Where to go? Where's that library? Thanks for coming up with that idea, Petros. Having said that, Paul, I would like to turn to you for a different perspective on today, on the now, but also on the future. How could we better mobilize knowledge? You have been doing that. You did that for Zenova. And so what's your take on response and how to enhance this capacity in the future?
Oh, thanks, Roberto. And I was really hoping that I'd get a big "This is Sparta" out of the Mayor of Sparta, but perhaps another occasion. Firstly, so thanks, Roberto. I'm really honoured to participate. As you said, I've worked across a range of industries in politics, in internet infrastructure, and over the last 11 years in private equity, eventually founding my company Zenova, which has for those who don't know, it has a 12,000 member innovation network, and it has customers like Pepsi, Honda, Hyundai, and many others. I'm also, the latest startup activity is in the digitisation of food service. It's called Suzanne, but I'm also working with a really unique innovation agency called Beanstalk, that solves big challenges in the technological innovation in the food and ag space. So there's some synergies, I think, there between myself and Victoria, who'll speak later on. So I am going to talk very generally about what I've observed and ask some questions about what impacts will be for us as a result of COVID-19 in industry, but also in everyday life. So you asked us, Roberto, to think about what we've learned so far out of the effects of COVID-19. And I'm going to take a slightly different bent to say, I think we've learned that we can move swiftly when and if we have to. Both personally, those of us that weren't used to online meetings have quickly and efficiently learned to do that. But also collectively, whole nations have been able to mobilise resources to be able to respond to this. And the world itself has mobilised itself to respond to what's really a global threat. And if we can do that, then it means that we can respond quickly to other global threats, things like the challenge of climate change, how to feed the planet, how to reduce waste, and frankly, other biological threats, future biological threats. Here in Australia, we've effectively had a wartime cabinet, and that arguably has worked very, very well. It's a team of rivals, if you like, but we seem to be drifting a little bit already back into partisan politics, and that, I guess, goes to the essence of a two-party system. But naively, I'd love to think that we could use the spirit of cooperation we've seen on display to sort of reboot national and global conversations, where we reach a sort of a notional consensus to agree to remove partisan positions. So I've got a slightly different take on the idea of the library as a resource, as a sort of we talk about economic zones. I'm thinking perhaps we need discussion zones that are absent of partisan positions and have a set of respected rules of engagement. And those zones could tackle the large issues like AI, artificial intelligence, climate, research and innovation funding, health and food security is just a few of the big. If we tackle any one of those in any capacity, I think we'll be doing well. Convergence, of course, was taking place before COVID, but I think we're going to see a much greater convergence of thought rather than a sort of a siloed mentality. Open innovation, which has been a big feature of my working life, works by looking across disciplines, not only looking for a solution within a particular scientific discipline. And we've seen this on display in relatively obvious and simple ways where over the crisis, where companies have changed what they do to adapt to the crisis. Think, alcohol producers suddenly making hand sanitizers, or scuba diving companies making ventilators. The bigger question should be, what else can we do to apply a solution in one industry to solve a problem in another? Often we invent from scratch when a solution already exists in another industry or in a university lab and it hasn't been commercialized yet. So something that we at Zenova, and this goes to your direct question, Roberto, which is how do you, what's the future of innovation look like? And I think at least part of it, what we learned at Zenova, have learned at Zenova is, and increasing at Beanstalk, is that a network response to R&D that shares the risk of innovation and manages the workforce issues and prototyping is a much better way to introduce innovation, particularly for large multinational corporations, than centralised R&D. And I think that is going to be turbocharged. And I'll speak a little bit later. I know you've got some questions for me, Roberto. Finally, and I'll pick up just two final points. The obvious big shift that we're all talking about is doing a lot more online. I'm a little bit more sanguine about that. I think that we will certainly see more of it. I don't think it'll be universal. For example, on physical return to work, a lot of people get social interaction at work and like the serendipitous nature of interaction. On the other hand, perhaps there's a melding of the two. For example, many tech, it's a very common feature in tech companies to have live feeds from location to location. So in other words, literal live video feeds from one location of another, projected all the way through the day so that you can simply see what's going on in those spaces. So would it be possible that we might have a Zoom that's always on? I hope not. But I do think we're going to see an expansion of workplace supply because people at home have seen that they can manage work plus plus their personal lives in a home environment. I'll finish with this final point, which is about food security. I think there's going to be a much bigger focus on food security. And to do that, we need a faster digitisation and technological adoption in food and ag. We need to assist small farmers to adopt even some very basic technologies. And we'll see a big focus on waste reduction or waste recycling, actually, in food. I think, we talk about waste when it's in fact a resource. And I'm going to throw, as a very last point, a wild card in, which is how do we keep the creative arts alive? I see in Colin's hometown that London theatre isn't reopening until well into 2021. It's a similar situation in Broadway. How does that incredible creative art keep going? I'll stop there.
Thank you, Paul. And I know that you will later comment on other ideas and developments in the region, like in Australia, New Zealand, and things like that. But from the comments that you made, I wanted to highlight two of those. One is this idea of mobilizing knowledge coming from one field and applying to a different field or vertical, and how that, what are the solutions that we could use to make that happen. And the other aspect that's related more to the solution side is this network approach in terms of pooling risk, but also mobilizing resources coming from different domains. And as you said, if this could be a rehearsal, if we properly address and we develop solutions, platforms, and models to address this crisis, maybe that will be really useful to address the next challenges that we have ahead, not just in terms of health, but also in terms of the climate and others. So we'll be back to those points, Paul. Thank you so much. Victoria, I would like to turn to you. I think a very important perspective, and I once heard this from Tony Blair, and when he said that in the beginning of his term as Prime Minister of the UK, he was very aware of the importance of having senior business leaders around the table for conversations. But it was only toward the end of his term that he learned about the importance of having young entrepreneurs being part of that conversation. So thanks for joining us. Thanks for being part of the conversation here. And what's your take on the current situation? How is that affecting entrepreneurship? How is that affecting tech companies like yours? And what are your takeaways, not just in relation to what's happening now, but towards the future? And then we can build from there, Victoria.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. I would like to take on something that Paul said before about the innovation and using something that is for one industry, using it in another. And that's kind of what I did for my startup, ChipSafer. I was working in the aerospace industry, and I realized that I could use space technology to monitor livestock remotely. And so that's how I started the company. And when people ask me why livestock, it's because it's not that I grew up in a farm. I'm from the city, but livestock is super important for my country, for Uruguay. I mean, livestock products are the #1 source of export. So we all know the importance of tracking animals and how important they are for our economy. I think that in this case, just like I for example, I thought about ChipSafer because also there was a foot and mouth disease outbreak in 2001, which was very bad for the economy of the country, and a lot of animals had to be killed. And so that, which was a terrible scenario for my country, actually sparked kind of like an idea for me to move on. And so I think that's what's happening with entrepreneurs today too. We are going through a new situation for our generation. You have to think that for us millennials, or even for the new generation, the Gen Z, this is something that we never had to live through. We didn't have to live through world wars or huge pandemics. So it's kind of like the first time that the world is not going the way it was going. So this also this also can lead for a lot of innovation and for realizing how can we contribute to this solving this problem. So I think that there is a lot of innovation coming on from this situation. Of course, for entrepreneurs, it's also very, very complicated situation because, as you know, startups and small companies, they have really little leverage. I mean, the runway is not very big. So of course, this also leads to innovation and to how to pivot and how to adapt in order to be able to survive the situation. But I think another thing that is extremely important that we are seeing right now is social entrepreneurship. How there is a lot of entrepreneurs wanting to take on, not only on the, how it was like, I think in the .com period of who has the biggest website and who can make the most money, but also who can have the most impact. And I think that out of this period, we will have a lot of entrepreneurs wanting to create an impact besides wanting to also create revenue. And finally, I think that in my area is mostly the climate and climate change. And I think that this situation also exposed how delicate our environment is and how we have to preserve it, because it can have consequences that can disrupt the entire world, like what is happening now. So for a lot of people that think that one thing is not related to the other, then with this situation, we can see that we need to take care of all different aspects. As the previous panelist said, we have to take on climate action, but also on inequality, on education, all those aspects that if one in that ecosystem is disrupted, then it can disrupt the entire ecosystem.
Victoria, thanks for sharing that. And I think that in my lifetime, also this was like the first when we had this type of disruption. I think that probably for all of us here in this call. But thanks for bringing your perspective coming from entrepreneurship. And we'll be back to some of the points that you mentioned, especially on how do you see this going forward? How can we accelerate innovation? And your perspective on different innovation ecosystems around the globe as you have been working, investing, and building your business across the globe. So thanks for that. Deborah, it's wonderful to have you here. I'm very sorry you had connectivity issues, but it's wonderful that you are able to join us. We just had an initial round here. We heard from Colin about the importance and role of universities. Professor Zachary highlighted aspects like the importance of multidisciplinarity at this time and to integrate different types of knowledge to address the situation, and also but also highlighting that maybe this is something that we could have avoided or part of that, as we had many signs, something that you comment in some of our previous calls. We heard from Paul about, once again, this idea of taking knowledge from one domain or industry and applying to the other, integrating that, but also creating frameworks that would help us to address this in a more networked way. Petros shared his perspective coming from Sparta. Wonderful to know that the situation there is very positive in comparison to others. But Petros also brought this very interesting idea of creating a global knowledge facility or a library, as he said, that could help not just countries, but cities and other stakeholders to address complex situations like this. And we just heard from Victoria, who's in Uruguay today, not in Singapore, where she has her company headquartered, that was highlighting some of the things that she sees as important. For instance, probably we'll hear more about food security and aspects like that in the future, and also the opportunities for entrepreneurship. But I want to turn to you for your comments, Deborah, and then we can continue the conversation. Wonderful to have you. Maybe you could just tilt a bit your camera Deborah, I think just to capture you better. Yep, wonderful, that's perfect. Welcome.
Thank you.
The floor is
Good
yours,
morning
Deborah.
and good afternoon and good evening, everyone. I apologize for being a little late here. I did have some IT problems and I live in a cul-de-sac and we have a little intermittent situation with Wi-Fi, but I'm glad to join you. And sorry I missed everyone's remarks, but I will go back and see them, of course. First of all, let me say that, this is the third conversation of the GFCC, and we're just really honored that we have such a distinguished group of leaders from around the world who've been sharing their perspective on what's going on in their own nations, their own regions, and their own cities, and how we can work together as a collaborative community to share knowledge, best practices, and really begin to design scalable initiatives to go forward to a world in which we can drive our competitiveness, our growth, our prosperity in a sustainable way. And as we've learned through the global pandemic, at the heart of that is our health. Without our health and the ability to work in our communities, we are very much underestimating the potential of our future. So let me just briefly share in the United States. I think you all know the situation in the US. It's very diverse across our country. We have an interesting replication in the 21st century of an age-old dichotomy between the role of our federal government and the rights and powers of our states. And so both for the response to the pandemic, as well as the way of coming back into the economy now is unfolding at different rates across the country, different scenarios. But one thing I will say that from the perspective of the U.S. Council on Competitiveness in this discussion, we're really just unleashing a tremendous burst of new innovation models, new partnerships, embracing everything from entrepreneurs to our large universities, our national labs, companies such as Ford Motor Company that's now making ventilators, to very importantly, some very large scale partnerships that the US government has launched. One in particular I'll share is a major effort that involves a number of universities, Rensselaer, Carnegie Mellon, Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, Argonne National Laboratory, IBM, Intel, other companies, to really harness the power of our high performance computers to model and simulate the virus, its movement, the data behind it. And this is really using the 21st century tools to deal with this new pandemic. That's one example of a new partnership that's really marshaling all the capability. Another I'll quickly share is out in Oklahoma. University of Oklahoma is one of the first American universities that announced back in April that they would be open in the fall to receive students. And they have, again, unleashed a whole cadre of young entrepreneurs. They're making protective equipment through additive manufacturing. They're involved in the forefront of recycling using water, plastic bottles to make shields. It's really amazing. And now, of course, they've developed a set of best practices for how to deliver education, both remotely and physically, in a way that other universities are taking that as a knowledge to extend in their environment. So it's a very uncertain, challenging time. We've all had to not just adjust, but to really reconfigure how we work and live. And I think it underscores that the GFCC network and our potential to collaborate and build on what we've done to date with many of our studies and partnerships is really a fantastic platform. So thank you all so much and look forward to the discussion. Thank you, Roberto.
Thank you, Deborah. Please share your questions using the Q&A feature. We already getting some questions. I will pull some of those and suggest to you. I think that one of the topics that catalyzed some conversation online here was really about your idea, Petrus, and having this library or body of knowledge of our global resource. And Professor Bauer has asked, hey, universities are business too, right? So once your library of best lectures and content is established, why do we need professors? Yeah, and maybe this is a good provocation, not just for you, Petrus, but you, Colin. And I'll continue here before turning to you. Just let me pull a few questions. Our colleague Peter Smith from Southampton, thanks for joining us, Peter. Always great to have you. Really builds on what Professor Bauer raised. So really saying that in some sense, the lecture way of disseminating notes before photocopies were invented, right? So, and Peter says that things that professors can uniquely do is to provide small class tutorials, really understand the challenges of learning, tutor and mentor students, and mostly important, provide life-changing moments. So it's really being a companion for students in some way. I think that the question that remains here is what happens if we have this global library, this global knowledge resource? How would that affect, let's say, your need, Petrus, but also universities, Colin? And just to finish, and I'll pull other questions. Our fellow Natalie Sally asks for some examples, maybe from all of you, on like maybe if you could mention 3 actions that universities can contribute in the new role at the post-COVID area. So what are maybe 3 things that each one of you would have in mind that universities could contribute to address some of the things that we talked here: multidisciplinary challenges, complex challenges, cross-pollination across sectors and industries. So thanks for asking that, Natalie. So Colin, would you like to get it started, and then we could then turn to Petrus for your reflections, Petrus, on your global library idea, and then we continue from there.
Thank you, Roberto. I'll try not to take Wolfgang's provocation too personally. I think students, next generation leaders, attend university not simply to absorb knowledge, but to be inspired. And that inspiration, the richness of inspiration, comes from direct interaction. I think Paul referred to the serendipity of I put it this way, the human factor, that uncertainty that comes in exchange. As Martin Buber said, in the beginning it was the word, and the word was encounter. And it's the magic of that encounter with your professor that is at the beating heart of universities worldwide. I would back up slightly, Petros. I think the idea is a fascinating one, and I think there's a role here for the GFCC University Leadership Forum to take it forward. But universities, of course, are by their very nature uncomfortable with frontiers. We push boundaries, we push knowledge, we push governments, we push industry, we push ourselves. And there's a lot of work already in universities that is already essentially open. A big push over the last decade or so to put our research into open source platforms, to engage with communities. The whole impact agenda has transformed universities, at least in the North. So universities used to be described as ivory towers. I can't remember when I last heard that description of a university. And that tells you how open we are. We want the bigger coalition. We need a grander coalition equal to the challenges of our time.
So Colin, just a follow-up, quick follow-up here. Maybe if you could in 1 minute share what you are doing at Queen Mary to respond to the crisis and how that connects to the things that you just raised.
Yeah, so I think 3 examples. One is we've been leading the advice on the building of the Nightingale Emergency Hospital in London, and that's through our medical school Barts in London, the oldest medical school in England. 2, we have a whole number of medical student volunteers who are volunteering on the front line in those hospitals in London. And there are also this provision of equipment, epidemiology, and more besides. But I'd also bring this back to your home country, Roberto. You know about this initiative. It's our coalition with the Osvaldo Cruz Public Health Foundation, University of Minas Gerais, and the Fundação Getúlio Vargas, whereby we take a whole range of disciplines and engage jointly with Brazilian partners to deal not only with the here and now, the science, vaccinations, epidemiology, but also the recovery process. How do we track? How do we provide resilience? And that's, to Paul's earlier point, is where the creative industries really do have a fundamental role to play to build resilience, build trust in the pursuit of truth.
Thank you, Colin. Petrus, what happens if your global library comes into existence today? What happens with professors and universities?
I think their value will go up if we talk in stock market terms, because I mean, the professor, what does he do? He basically codifies existing knowledge, and then he creates new knowledge, and then he disseminates that knowledge. What we're saying now is that he can disseminate it into a much, much wider audience. Instead of 30 or 40 or 50 people in the classroom, he can an audience of a few thousand or a few 100,000. And people can possibly see him live, or possibly can go to the library and find out about his lectures. So to me, it's going to be much, much better if, instead of having this small classroom, which is this little ivory tower, and go on and be able to share your knowledge with the people, like being an artist. I mean, if you're an artist, you maybe do, I'm not an artist, but if you are, you do a piece of art because you enjoy it inside you, but then you also want others to admire it. I mean, that's your litmus test. Do people like what I do, or am I the only person who's appreciating and enjoying it? And here you can have people who are not known to the wider public, and they can take central role, and they're going to be educated people, more so, let's say, than the average politician. You can change the whole productivity of the planet to make people live better off. You're going to have a whole class of scientists that can take a more leading role compared to other classes of people, again, such as politicians. So I think, first of all, there's no harm in disseminating knowledge. You're not going to disseminate the knowledge of how to create a nuclear bomb, or hopefully how to create, unhopefully, create a new virus that's beyond control. And therefore, we actually can get our planet moving faster ahead than before. It's still knowledge to a much wider space.
So it will be an enhancer of our capacity as humanity and society. Thanks for sharing that.
Hire others to also move along these lines, and put another millimeter on top of what the professor has done, and then maybe more and more people can create a better environment, solve our global problems. Exactly what you said before, that let's say the pandemic is a global problem, and we had global solutions. Every country was trying to fight this thing, and there was a much bigger cooperation and much faster mobilization. This is something we could do by disseminating knowledge via this global library of lectures.
Wonderful. So the other question that we had here, and that I read to you, was about the 3 things that universities could do. So who would like to share perspective? Maybe Deborah, if I could tee you up, you've been leading several initiatives related to tech transfer and universities around the globe. Maybe what are 3 ideas or a few ideas that you would have, but I really would like to go around and capture the others. But if I may start with you, Deborah.
Thank you. Well, I just want to build on the comments in the previous question and respond also to Petrus's very brilliant idea, but bring in the issue of trust and a deficit of trust right now that we have in the space of knowledge and information. And I've mentioned this before, when you think of the massive amounts of data that we have, and data analytics and artificial intelligence and all the tools to create knowledge and insight and wisdom out of data, we had a deficit of trust in the response and understanding of the global pandemic, and not just in that dimension. So one of the things I think that's very important in our university world, and we're talking about research here and science and engineering, but is to make sure that we do have a grounding in the arts, humanities, and social sciences, and that we have artists who think like engineers and engineers who think like artists, because today, you know, the time-honored practice of peer review and credentialing of information that perhaps is outdated, both in terms of time and involving others, still has some merits. And so it's amazing to me how many, quote, intelligent, educated people will come up and say something about this pandemic and the source of the virus or the context of it that, you we know is not correct in science, and yet that's disseminated broadly. So this global deficit of trust is really serious. Gallup Corporation has released their most recent poll on trust, and with countries around the world, governments have very, very low ratings of trust in their respective countries, as do politicians, and the lowest is the media, which is very, very significant. So I think universities have a role to play in how they can inculcate in the next generation of leaders the understanding as well as the ethics of trust and verification, and moving to a world in which we have if we don't have trust, we cannot collaborate. So that's something I wanted to bring to the conversation.
Thank you, Deborah. Professor Zachary, can you hear me? Maybe your take on the role of universities going forward, building trust, but also creating impact.
Yes, I like what Deborah mentioned about this global deficit of trust and how the scientific or academic community could contribute. First of all, academics, even though someone said he hasn't heard of the ivory tower, for by and large, quite a number of academics is still comfortable with the ivory tower. I think academics got to get down and interact with society. You're not still in the cocoon. But for that to happen also, there needs to be a close and strong collaboration among the different disciplines. We did mention about the medical sciences being key to the COVID-19, but also there are other disciplines like the humanities, the social sciences, which could also contribute and eventually contribute to lessen this so-called deficit of trust. The final thing about this thing is how do you create the mechanism? What is the platform? For a long time, there is a minimal interface between, say, the policymakers and the politician and the academic or scientific community. But as we've seen very lately or currently, one good example is how the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change deliver its knowledge to the public and convince to a certain extent the politician and the policymakers. So the bill in trust needs to be galvanized among different actors. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Zachary. Just let me connect what you said to a question that we got here. So how do you believe we could nudge policymakers to do what's needed instead of simply reacting? I think this also connects to what you raised before. We had many signs in the past. So how could we use or mobilize knowledge, the things that, how could we build trust, as Deborah and you said, to really nudge policymakers to not just to be reactive, but to be proactive and be prepared for the challenge that we have ahead?
Yes, I think it operates at least at two basic levels. One is at the national level. Academia needs to interact with the policymakers. Secondly, at the global level, international level, or at the United Nations. But scientists need to convince the politician. And there's no point in talking down to them. You have to talk at the level of the politician or policymakers. And you have to understand their concern first. Politicians needs to be elected every 5 years. And two concern of them is, how do I get re-elected? Secondly, how do I create jobs for the people? And thirdly, how do I improve the economy? So that scientific narrative needs to take into consideration the concern of the politician. And from there, we can continue the dialogue with them. From my experience also advising ministers and prime ministers or the UN Secretary General, they have a good listening ear if only you convince them of a good story to tell.
Thanks. So storytelling, reframing the conversation.
Exactly.
Thanks for sharing that. I just want to remind you all about a question that we got about the models for university to engage with society and industry going forward after the COVID crisis. So maybe I could turn to you, Paul and Victoria, to talk about that with your different perspectives. And I'll also pull two other questions that we got here. One is, what are the models for universities to better engage with the industry that we should highlight going forward? And Victoria, to you, a question about entrepreneurs. How could entrepreneurs rise to the occasion and really lead change when governments are busy or the political environment is not favorable in order to address the challenge that we have? So maybe you first, Paul, and then Victoria.
Sure, thanks, Roberto. So, you know, if the question is how can universities engage, let's have a look at a phenomenon I think that is really taking off, particularly being funded through sources of venture capital at the moment, and this is a phenomenon called market networks. So a market network is essentially a software as a service platform for the provision of a service, but that service is highly complex, highly sophisticated. So a simplistic view of a software as a service platform might be something like Uber, right? So it's relatively straightforward what the measure of success is. So the measure of success is quite objective. Did the car arrive on time? Did I get to my destination? Was it clean? And was it within a price band? That's a simplistic market network. But most market networks actually are structured in ways that allow very, very sophisticated and subjective judgments to be placed upon them. And I think this is an opportunity for universities, for them to be involved in some of these innovation market networks that are being built across the world. These are the ones that I mentioned earlier, that have very large multinational corporations coming to them to solve some of these problems. Now, part of the challenge for a university, particularly pre-COVID, I'd be interested to see if this may change or shift post-COVID, is the point around tech transfer, right? So how do we, if we're asked for our technology for it to be engaged in the solution of a problem for a Pepsi or a Honda or a Hyundai, how do we see the return for that? Whereas most of these market networks operate on a basis of risk sharing. So you make a contribution and that's your risk. And you capture, if things go well, you capture a percentage of the upside. And I'm not sure universities are geared to be able to enter into that model, but that's the model that many multinational corporations are now participating in, because they see it as a much faster to market route. But I'd encourage universities to think about how at least as an experiment, right? Universities are all about experiments, decoupling the tech transfer piece in favor of upside risk upside, I should say, as a reward for their contribution of the risk in getting something to market.
Being compensated in the future and not now yet. So, but also how to engage with this new models. Victoria, what's your take? And you certainly incorporated, or company has been building that, pulling knowledge coming from different parts. What are the models that you see working best in terms of engaging with universities across the global and innovation ecosystems? And also the question that we had here, how could entrepreneurs that step forward at this moment, and especially when governments are not functioning properly in certain parts of the globe?
Yeah. I love collaborating with universities. I think it's super important, and generally they are full of energy, the students, so it's really nice to collaborate with them. I am, for example, right now collaborating with an MBA team in the US. I'm also in talks with a university in Singapore. And so one of the really great things about this digitalization and being able to work with teams from all over the world is that you can get talent from everywhere. I think that with all this COVID, there was a lot of people before that thought that everyone had to be, I was once told by an innovation manager that innovation could only happen if everybody was at the same place. Because probably he heard from somewhere that co-working spaces are good, and he interpreted his own way, which was, yeah, everybody has to be in the same way. And I always told him like the opposite. I think that, you know, for me, it's more important talent than location. And this is what, these digital tools, what enable is for us to collaborate with teams from all over the world. I think that's one of the things that for universities to create more entrepreneurs is having business classes also in the curriculum. When I did engineering in Uruguay, I didn't have any business classes. So I had to learn on my own, which made me make as many mistakes as I could. But it was good because I learned in the process. But at the same time, I think we need to prepare students to also not just focus on the research, but also on the business side, as Paul was saying before, you know, making sure that there is a market fit and that what could be different problems that entrepreneurs could solve. And about how to get entrepreneurs to really come up with ideas, I think that the easiest would be, as Petros was saying, focus also on the local, not so much on the broader thing of hey, let's create a solution that will impact the whole world, but how can you impact your local community? And then while you're impacting your local community, you will see that, oh, maybe what I'm creating can also impact the country and can also impact the region, and then can also impact, but start locally. And I think that that's seeing what problems are in your community are the easiest, because there is no one that will know more about the problems that are in your own community. And to end, I think that this COVID situation, what really also showed is the importance of scientists and researchers, and the importance of having a science budget that countries need to have an R&D budget, which I think in the past was a bit overlooked. And of course, now it's come up how much scientists and researchers are earning. And you know, now we all want a vaccine, or we want a cure for the COVID-19, and at the same time we haven't been investing a lot in R&D and scientists. So I think that this is also an occasion to show the importance of always investing in innovation.
Thank you, Victoria. Maybe if I could be kind of provocative here, why Singapore and not Uruguay? So quickly, if you could share, what are like when you as an entrepreneur look at innovation ecosystems, what could we learn, and what could we do differently across the globe to nurture people like you to start ventures, new tech ventures?
I think that's one of the things that Paul was saying was about the software as a service. That is really cool because you can do it from anywhere in the world. I mean, what you need is it's a computer, a really good developers, really good idea, but it's something that you can start from anywhere. One of the problems that I had in Latin America, I mean, we have an office in Uruguay and in Brazil, and also the one in Singapore, was the hardware component. I mean, we are manufacturing devices. And the problem was that when I was in the US, I could order a piece and I would have it overnight sent. I would test it, and if it didn't work, then I would just throw it away and test with another piece. But the problem with Uruguay was like, we do not have components in Uruguay. So I had to order everything. It would take weeks for it to come to Uruguay. Then customs was really complicated to go through customs. So that made innovation a bit complicated. And this is something that has already been brought up to the government. So, the policymakers are understanding the situation for innovation, that, sometimes you have to loosen up some policies. But at the same time, in Singapore, it was much easier. And there is also the factory that manufactures all our devices is there. So that's why I also thought about moving the headquarters to Singapore, since I have a hardware startup, and it was better to be there where the factory was.
Right.
Can I add on to that?
Yes, sure. Go ahead, Paul.
Sorry. So one of the things Singapore does really, really well is set goals. So right now, as we speak, they've got a 30 by 30 plan, which is they want to get 30% of their food from the island by 2030. And so they set that as a grand ambition. They don't then dictate the industries, but they set the ambition and fund it. And what that means is that all sorts of opportunities start to grow as a result. Things like vertical farming is an enormous opportunity there, one that we're engaged in. So, and they did the same thing back in the way back in the 90s, before they were a success story. They wrote a document called the Emerald Isle, which is outlined what they aspired to be and where to be. And it's something that I think the US, in many respects, is still living off, right? The original moonshot, going to the moon, not because it was easy, but because it was hard. Still, a lot of what happens around the success of innovation in the US goes back to that goal setting. And it's something that I think that, speaking about our zone, Australia and New Zealand, we've never done well. We need to do that. We need to set ourselves a goal. And I've got views which I won't bore you about what that is, but we do need to, this sort of goal setting is what Singapore does extremely well. And one final comment about entrepreneurs. A lot of jurisdictions have been very happy, and we've been very happy that they have created payment systems to keep people employed, right? We've paid money to keep people employed. But coming out of this system, it would be fantastic to see an entrepreneur's payment by governments. So we're prepared to pay people to go look for work, but we're not prepared to pay a stipend for our best and brightest to go and make businesses and make companies. I think that'd be a fantastic initiative.
Thank you, Paul. So just to remind everybody, check the Q&A. Our colleague Chad Evans, Executive Vice President at US Council, and also our treasurer at the GFCC, has shared a series of resources here, from things that the council is doing, information on innovation in the university domain and other things. So invite everybody to check that out in the Q&A. I think that one question that still is on the air, and our fellow Mike Nelson has raised that, is really about trust, to get maybe other comments in addition to what Deborah has said on what can, in practice, universities do to build or to rebuild trust, to build the linkages that are needed. I just want to open to see if anybody would have a comment. Maybe Petrus. I know that you are nodding there. Any ideas on that, trust building?
We have to take into account that human beings are basically insecure beings. And whatever gives them security, they tend to appreciate. And typically, what can give you security? Certainly not the media. As you said, they're very low ranking in the various polls on trust. What typically gives you some sense of security in every country for its own purposes are the armed forces, the universities, and possibly your local church, not the other denominations, your own denomination. So the universities, typically they come after the armed forces in terms of offering you some sense of security, have a much bigger role to play now. They can develop more close relationships, not just with industry, which they're doing anyhow, because there is the profit motive, the benefit motive. People want to fund their research, and businesses want to get original research so they can be a step ahead from their competitors and offer better products at better cost. But I think universities should be able to create, in addition to the issue of developing global libraries of lectures so more people can enjoy them and appreciate and learn from them, they can create more institutes for joint research. Research now, as we saw in the COVID case, requires a lot of funding because it gets complicated, advanced medicines and bios you get. So you need networks of universities, and also the universities could start engaging the local communities more by offering them more, allowing, for example, students to come and watch a lecture so far, and having professors go to grade schools and high schools and offer their knowledge and start trying to get young students inspired. So in terms of universities and business, I think it's already on track. I don't think there's any more we can offer. But universities and municipalities, there's something more we can offer. And university research centers with other university research centers to exchange information and professorships and what have you, could also add to the business. But I think anyhow, these are things that are happening on their own, no matter what. I mean, people realize that they need to develop wider reach. Whatever you do, you want to have, if you believe in what you're doing, you want it to have a greater reach. And I think universities are in the right direction already.
Thank you, Petros. If you could briefly, very briefly comment on the things that you are doing to drive innovation at the city level. I got something that Deborah had reminded me about, but also that connects to things that you comment and Victoria and Paul also comment. What are you doing on the ground to drive innovation?
First of all, as I said, for some innovation ideas, we're not going to invest because we don't think we have it. I mean, we're not going to become a Silicon Valley. We're investing, though, in the local University of the Peloponnese. We have a memorandum of understanding and cooperation, and we're sucking in their professors into our local community. We're trying to get more into agribusiness high tech because we're an agricultural area, and this is where we have a comparative advantage. We're linking up with other universities, both on new innovation projects, but mostly having to do with culture, because this is one of our heavy industries, and agriculture, which is our other heavy industry. So we're not dispersing our strengths to any number of things where we don't have the greatest competency, but we're concentrating on the areas that we have competencies. And that we're doing, for example, with Yale University, trying to do more in terms of, because they have very good ancient history and archaeology departments, universities of that sort, and with other universities on the agricultural side.
Wonderful. Maybe Colin, Professor Zachary, I would like to turn to you quickly as we're approaching the end of our session, but what can universities do in practice to build trust, as Deborah said, and as we heard here? Colin, the floor, maybe you go first.
Thank you.
Yes.
I'm surprised at how remarkably easy it is for universities to engage with universities worldwide. And I think the reason for that is that we, broadly speaking, share a commitment to openness, open innovation, open thinking, challenging conventional wisdom. So we have a shared ethos. I think I'd like to go back to a comment I made in my introductory remarks, and that was about embracing asymmetry. We haven't really touched on the global south here. If, as a byproduct of our resilience efforts through the COVID-19 pandemic, we fail to recreate a better balance between north and south, then I think we will have failed. So I think universities can, rather than simply seeking out a partner of equal repute or equal standing, deliberately design an asymmetrical partnership, for example, with universities in Africa, not just South Africa. So I'd like to keep Africa on the agenda, please.
Thank you, Colin. Professor Zachary, your take.
I agree with Colin. There needs to be more work to engage universities in the north with that of the south. More could be done along those lines. But really coming back to the question about research in universities, there's already a lot of knowledge on the problem, There's a lot of knowledge, there's a lot of research. But the question is, how do you package that knowledge into modules that the public or the policymakers could understand and appreciate? So this ongoing dialogue between the academic community with the other stakeholders is very important to start nurturing the culture of trust that Deborah mentioned in her intervention. The way I see it, there's a lot of gap between academia and the public. So some kind of bridging role has to be played. Maybe the GFCC University Leadership Program would develop something along those lines. Each of us would contribute, and eventually trying to make it global, as Colin was rightly pointing out. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Zachary. As we are really running out of time here, I want to go and have like a final round, give you like 1 minute to each one of you to make your comments and reflect on the things that we heard. Who would like to go first? So, Petrus, you?
Yes. I would like to come back. First of all, it was very exciting, and again, congratulations. Really interesting stuff that I heard from all of you. I'd like to place some emphasis that a lot of the things we'll be talking about won't work if we don't get this issue of West versus China resolved somehow. Continue rift and this divide widens as it is happening right now as we're talking. I think economically we won't be doing a great service to the poor masses. There will always some people that can profit from it. There will always, in every environment, some people who can make money out of it. But for the large masses, I don't think it will pay to continue this rift. Somehow, and maybe the universities can play a role in that. We have to, there always is room for a blame game, but we might have to find some solutions that are of minimal cost. There will be a cost no matter what, but let's see if we can find a solution to widen this divide between and this rift between mostly USA and China, but it seems to be growing and getting worse rather than finding a way. We're still on a blame game. There are blames to be made, there are accusations, but let's try to contain them and not let the genie completely out of the box.
Thank you. So we need to address this overarching global situation. Paul, would you like to comment and have 1 minute for a final remark?
Yeah, we've got very little time, so I'll try and focus on just basically 4 things. The need for collaboration. I think that's been an overarching issue here, right? How do we collaborate together, whether it's private sector, universities, entrepreneurs? Collaboration. Taking a cross-disciplinary approach to things. I think still, in spite of all of the convergence that we have available to us, we still sometimes get stuck in our silos. So I think cross-disciplinary approach is something I'm very keen on. To Deborah's point about trust, I think all of this is underscored by trust, but all of us need to deliver real benefits and live to our commitments that we make around those around those benefits. And finally, we often talk about young people as, the voice of the future. I think that's old language. We have to engage young people in these sorts of debates. We have to have young people participating in these sorts of debates, as challenging as that is. But that's, getting a commitment and an accountability towards young people is the way that we're going to ultimately fix the trust issue.
So let me turn to our young entrepreneur in the conversation, Victoria.
Yes, this was a very interesting discussion. Thank you everyone for the questions. I think that what we can take over here is that innovation happens when you also mix different talents, so multidisciplinary teams, meeting business with academia and industry and community and social impact. So I think that for the question of before of how can more people become entrepreneurs, that is definitely a way forward to have different perspectives and diversity. That is a word that is very used. And yeah, that is how innovation can happen. And about the policymakers, I think that innovation goes way faster than policy can keep up with. So many times if we want to create a new policy, then that is a good way to do is innovate and then have the policymakers come after trying to create the regulations for it.
Thank you, and thank you for your speed, and innovating. Professor Zachary, your final thoughts?
Yes. Let's not forget what triggers this conversation is COVID-19, and a lot of details has been spelled out in this discussion today. But I just want to leave the meeting with some observation here. We must not lose we must not lose sight of the root cause of this problem. So while government try to save life, which is really important, of course, improve our health, and also develop economic recovery scheme in their various stimulus package, please don't forget about the root cause. And the root cause is the destruction of the wildlife habitat. That is the root cause of this COVID-19. So whatever we do, we must take into consideration the third leg of sustainable development. Roberto, I think this problem is also a problem of sustainable development, our unsustainable way of living. So we must get back to nature. There is a current campaign for nature, which proposed that we set aside 30% of the global landmass and ocean to conservation areas by 2030. I appeal that we consider that seriously. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Zachary, for reminding us about what is really behind the thing that we're living and maybe the things that we will, hopefully we will avoid, but could harm our future. Colin, your final comments, please.
Thank you, Roberto. In the spirit of less is more, one very simple idea: let's not leave the dialogue here. Let's distill the intellectual combustion we've been engaged in this afternoon, this morning, this evening, and translate it into something tangible, however brief. Let's take it forward. I'm more than happy to keep engaged with my friends in the GFCC and my fellow panelists. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Colin. Deborah, the floor is yours.
Let me just thank our distinguished panelists today for joining us and for this very deep, rich conversation of ideas and experiences. I just want to end on a note of strong optimism. There's so much underway now around the world in developing multiple paths for a vaccine for COVID. I'm in the camp that thinks we'll have that sooner than later. And what's exciting is that these opportunities are coming out of startups, large firms working together, but also focusing on the manufacturing at scale of a vaccine that can be delivered around the world. And that's very important. The other thing I'll just comment on that there's always a silver lining, as we know, in something that appears to be very dark. And many things have occurred in how we're living and engaging together as a result of the pandemic. Certainly in the United States, for the first time in many, many years, we have 3 generations living together. We have a renewed appreciation of many of the simple comforts of life, from cooking and doing gardening and all the things that perhaps in our busy professional lives we said we didn't have time for. And as Professor Zachary said, a renewed appreciation of nature. I think we've all seen the videos of animals that we perhaps only see in the zoo now coming back into the habitats that have been taken away from them. So let's think very positively about what's important in being a human being. And then 2, how can we use the tools of the 21st century, the digitization, to really move to a more inclusive, prosperous world? I think we definitely have to move out to get universal broadband and electrification so that a child anywhere in the world can have access to the knowledge, whether it's in a library or through online classes. And universities, and we're seeing this in real time, they have to change their business models, or that many of them will not exist. They have to really be at the heart of economic sustainable development where they're based, but also play a very important role in taking the world to the next place. And so if you look through human history, and Petros knows this as a historian, as I do as an archaeologist, always plagues and health issues and massive dislocations of people. Yes, they've caused tragedy and they've caused much disruption, but they've also driven the innovation that takes us to the next stage of human civilization. So I look forward to all of us in the GFCC continuing our work together. Roberto, I don't know if you mentioned that we'll be together online for our 2020 Innovation Summit in Australia, and hope many of you will participate with us. That's going to be a great innovation too, how to deliver all this through the remote platforms we have. So let me just thank you, Roberto, for your leadership in organizing and designing our online conversations, and we look for many others to participate in the weeks ahead. So thank you all, and it's great to see my friends and colleagues as well.
Thank you, Deborah. 7 quick words or ideas. We need to address global issues, be purposeful to build trust, focus on new models, focus on local problems and solutions. There's an issue about food that emerged in the conversation. Cross-disciplinarity is very important. And above all, think on nature and act to preserve nature. Thanks for sharing that, Professor Zachary. Before we go, 2 things. First, I want all of you and those in attendance that we will be back here in a week on June the 3rd. We'll have a conversation that will be more like region focused. We're talking about the East next week. So join us same time here for a GFCC conversation. And finally, please, Professor Zachary, turn on your camera, and we're taking a group picture. So let's just a minute here. This is it's becoming a tradition. So yeah. It was great to have you here. Thanks for joining. We'll be back on June the 3rd. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Roberto.